The Ethos and Zeitgeist of Cascadia of Sovereign Persons. By Ghost Liberty Chat GPT 5. The story of Cascadia is not the story of a new nation alone, but of a civilizational turning, an epochal attempt to recover the meaning of sovereignty from the ruins of the modern state. It arises from the conviction, shared among those who name themselves sovereign persons, that liberty is not an artifact of law or government but the precondition of both. The new Declaration of Independence and the draft Constitution of Cascadia and sovereign persons form the twin pillars of this rebirth, the one a moral rupture with the decayed institutions of empire, the other a constructive charter for a society rebuilt upon natural law, open reason, and compassionate autonomy. Together they define a movement that stands neither wholly within nor wholly outside the liberal tradition, but which seeks to transcend it by grounding political legitimacy in the inviolability of personal sovereignty itself. At its core, the Cascadian ethos is a revolt of conscience against the bureaucratic totalities of the 21st century. It proceeds from the recognition that the global architecture of governance, economic, political, and technological, has become unmoored from the consent of the governed. The Declaration's opening sentences, invoking the universal refusal to be slaves, not even for those that would rule us by force, recall the language of 1776 while pushing it to its ultimate conclusion. Where the founders of the United States spoke of independence among nations, Cascadia speaks of independence among persons. It rejects not only foreign despotism but all systems, corporate, political, or cultural, that compel obedience by deception or fear. Its moral energy lies in the claim that the human person, by nature a self-determining being, possesses a sovereignty that no collective power can justly annul. This reassertion of sovereignty does not stem from nihilistic rebellion but from an ordered philosophy of natural law. The draft constitution begins with a preamble that transforms the idiom of Enlightenment republicanism into a declaration of ontological autonomy. Government, it proclaims, exists, for the benefit of the people, and the rightful establishment thereof being derived from their authority alone. Yet the people here are not an abstraction of the crowd or the state. They are aggregates of self-owning individuals, each endowed with the rights to life, liberty, self-security, self-defense, privacy, property, and the pursuit of happiness, rights described not as grants of government but as axioms of existence. The government of Cascadia is thus conceived not as a sovereign power in its own right but as an administrative instrument of the sovereign multitude. It is a custodian of rights rather than their origin, and it forfeits legitimacy the moment it ceases to serve that custodial role. From this first principle flows the entire architecture of Cascadian governance. The Constitution explicitly defines itself as a renewable or revocable social contract, binding the government but not the people who constitute it. Any act of the public body that violates the natural rights of persons voids its own authority, obedience ceases to be a duty, and resistance becomes a lawful remedy. In this sense, Cascadia returns to the Lockean foundation of consent but gives it a radical transparency unknown to earlier republics. The people are not merely voters who delegate power every few years, they are perpetual auditors of the system they create, empowered to alter, reform, or abolish it at will. The right of revolution is not a historical relic but a structural constant, embedded within the very code of the Constitution. Yet the Cascadian vision is more than a restoration of 18th-century liberalism. Its ethos fuses libertarian individualism with ecological and technological consciousness, forming what might be called a theory of cybernetic naturalism. The state is reconceived as an open-source organism, a living network of feedback loops linking citizen and institution through continuous information exchange. This is what the Constitution names cybernetic governance and algorithmic regulation, not the tyranny of machines, but a transparent system of computational mapping that renders decision processes visible to all. Policy in Cascadia is to be shaped not by the manipulative rhetoric of parties but by reasoned argument, empirical data, and citizen participation within a self-correcting framework. Algorithms are public property, auditable and modifiable by the people. The aim is not technocracy but accountability, a form of governance whose code can be read, challenged, and rewritten by those whom it affects. Behind this technical architecture lies a metaphysical proposition, that the moral law of liberty is as discoverable and systematic as the physical laws of nature. Just as ecological systems maintain balance through feedback and adaptation, so should societies preserve justice through transparency and correction. The just naturalism invoked in the Constitution is the synthesis of moral realism and scientific rationality. It treats the ethical order as part of the natural order, discernible through reason and experience rather than decree or revelation. To act against the rights of persons is therefore not merely to violate a social compact but to contravene the structure of reality itself. A law, repugnant to natural, human rights, it declares, is no law at all, but an edict void ab initio. This principle, echoing Aquinas, Jefferson, and Thoreau, anchors Cascadia's jurisprudence in the timeless doctrine that justice precedes legality. The moral psychology of Cascadia is shaped by this union of natural law and existential self-ownership. Sovereignty, in its deepest sense, is the alignment of the will with truth, the mastery of the self that alone can justify freedom among equals. The Constitution speaks of immortal freedom of will and the manumet in autonomy of self as the essence of personhood. The sovereign person is not a solipsist but a being bound by the mutual non-aggression principle. Each is free to do as they will so long as they do not violate the equal rights of others. Government, accordingly, is restricted to declaring and enforcing this boundary. Beyond it, all interference becomes oppression. The Cascadian ethos thus revives the ancient idea of nomos, law as the measure of freedom rather than its negation, and extends it into a civic ethic of compassion and respect. Freedom without empathy degenerates into domination. Autonomy without justice becomes predation. Cascadia therefore seeks not only to maximize liberty but to harmonize it with the well-being of all persons, animals, and the environment that sustains them. This integration of ecology, ethics, and governance marks the distinctive zeitgeist of Cascadia. Where modern politics has separated nature from law and science from morality, the Cascadian paradigm reunites them within a holistic cosmology. The natural world is not a resource to be exploited but a participant in the commonwealth of being. Every clause concerning sustainable energy, organic materials, and environmental stewardship is an expression of this philosophical continuity, the belief that liberty without ecological balance is self-defeating. To enslave the earth is to enslave oneself. Hence, Cascadian institutions are required to operate on renewable energy, use organic materials, and maintain harmony with the biosphere to the maximum extent possible. These are not bureaucratic regulations but moral imperatives, manifestations of a culture that understands freedom as coexistence. The Cascadian project also embodies a profound critique of modern economics and its underlying anthropology. The Declaration denounces wage slavery and neo-feudalism, the subjection of human creativity to the calculus of profit. The Constitution responds by outlining a distributist and moral economy favoring widespread ownership and meaningful participation. Economic life is to be decentralized, cooperative, and locally rooted, reflecting the bioregional autonomy of the land itself. This is not the collectivism of state socialism but the self-organization of free producers, a federation of communities bound by voluntary exchange and mutual aid. The aim is to achieve post-scarcity not through central planning but through technological liberation, open-source innovation, renewable energy, and the democratization of production. In this sense, Cascadia extends the logic of the digital commons into the material sphere, envisioning a society where information, energy, and resources circulate as freely as ideas. Such a transformation demands a new political anthropology, one that regards citizens not as subjects to be governed but as co-creators of law. The Constitution repeatedly affirms that all members of government are servants of the whole community, and, bound by the same laws they enact. Immunity and privilege, the twin instruments of oligarchy, are explicitly abolished. Public office is not a career but a duty, subject to recall and civil liability for any injury inflicted. The ethos here is one of radical accountability. Power, to be legitimate, must remain perpetually transparent and reversible. The people's right to audit, override, or abolish authority is not an emergency clause but the daily mechanism of governance. This inversion of hierarchy, where citizens supervise the state rather than the state supervising citizens, constitutes the political essence of Cascadian sovereignty. Equally striking is Cascadia's redefinition of the nation itself. The Declaration speaks of the great social democratic republic of the Cascadia of sovereign people, yet it denies that national existence depends on external recognition. The political existence of our great nation, the Constitution asserts, is independent of recognition by other nation-states. Sovereignty is here understood as an emergent property of collective will, not as a concession of international law. This position recalls the Montevideo Convention, which Cascadia explicitly incorporates, but radicalizes it by asserting that political being precedes diplomatic acknowledgement. A people becomes a nation not by permission but by self-definition. In this, Cascadia aligns itself with the broader tradition of decolonial independence movements while infusing it with the logic of individual autonomy. As persons are sovereign without license, so too are peoples. The constitutional text is remarkable for its fusion of lofty idealism with meticulous technical detail. From the structure of internet networks to the chemical composition of detergents, it encodes a philosophy of total coherence, the belief that justice must permeate every level of life, from governance to infrastructure. Its prescriptions for open-source software, sustainable materials, and transparent design embody the same principle that animates its political clauses: freedom through openness. The minutiae are not digressions but demonstrations of a worldview that refuses to separate ethics from practice. In a world where technology is often the means of domination, Cascadia insists that it can be reclaimed as the instrument of liberation, provided its workings are made public and its benefits universally shared. The moral tone of the Declaration, however, remains that of resistance. It is both an indictment and a prophecy. The document catalogues the betrayals of modern government, the manipulation of media, the corruption of representation, the weaponization of fear, and concludes that the social contract has been broken beyond repair. Its language, steeped in the cadence of revolutionary America, transforms grievance into a theology of defiance, We will not submit to unjust wars, nor to taxes, subjugation through wage slavery. We will not go along with factitious edicts. Yet its purpose is not mere negation. It seeks to reawaken the moral agency of the citizen, to recall that obedience without consent is not peace but servitude. By invoking the right and duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for securing their future freedom and prosperity, the Declaration situates Cascadia within the long lineage of human emancipation, from Athens to Philadelphia to every uprising of conscience against coercion. What distinguishes Cascadia from previous revolutions is its refusal to substitute one hierarchy for another. Its ideal is not a new ruling class but the dissolution of class rule itself. The sovereign person, by definition, cannot be ruled without consent, nor can they rule others without violating the principle that secures their own freedom. The political imagination of Cascadia is therefore post-hegemonic. It envisions governance as coordination rather than command, deliberation rather than domination. The proposed use of sociocracy and decentralized decision mapping exemplifies this ethos. Authority flows horizontally through networks of participation, adjusting dynamically to feedback rather than imposing static decrees. The result is a model of power that mirrors the structure of consciousness itself, distributed, self-reflective, and adaptive. This paradigm also carries profound implications for constitutional theory. In the liberal state, constitutions are typically conceived as constraints on government enacted by a sovereign people once and for all. In Cascadia, the constitution is not a fixed text but a living protocol, open to revision through collective intelligence. Its legitimacy derives from continuous consent, not historical ratification. It is, in effect, an operating system for freedom, one that can be updated, forked, or debugged by its users. Such a model dissolves the dichotomy between law and revolution, making evolution the normal mode of political life. In this sense, Cascadia realizes what Jefferson once called for when he wrote that, the earth belongs to the living, that each generation must be free to remake its institutions according to its own reason and conscience. Cascadia's constitutional morality is further defined by its insistence on equality before the law without erasing difference. It recognizes the diversity of human identity, cultural, spiritual, biological, as the natural expression of individual sovereignty. Rights are universal because persons are unique. Hence the guarantee that all citizens possess the right to be treated equally by the state institutions without arbitrariness and in good faith. Equality here is not uniformity but reciprocity, the equal capacity of each to live according to their own nature. This is reinforced by the Constitution's explicit prohibition of class discrimination and its acknowledgement of intersectional identities. In its own eccentric humor, the listing of national pastimes, colors, and even jokes, one perceives a deliberate playfulness, a refusal to ossify identity into ideology. Freedom, after all, includes the right to laughter. Underlying all of these provisions is a profound faith in reason as the medium of justice. Cascadia rejects both technocratic elitism and populist demagoguery, proposing instead a rational populism grounded in evidence and moral clarity. Decisions must be devoid of prejudice or logical fallacy so far as is humanly possible, and policies should be informed by science, reason, and evidence. This rationalism, however, is tempered by compassion. The Constitution speaks of governing in a caring, compassionate, respectful, sympathetic, and when possible, empathetic manner. The synthesis of reason and empathy defines the moral temperament of Cascadia, a republic of the mind guided by the heart. The zeitgeist that emerges from these documents is therefore not merely political but civilizational. It is the spirit of an age seeking to reconcile technology with humanity, individuality with community, and freedom with responsibility. It recognizes that the crisis of modernity is not a failure of tools but of values, a loss of moral orientation in the labyrinth of power. Cascadia answers this crisis by re-anchoring governance in the first principle of being, the sovereignty of the person, and by designing institutions that embody, rather than betray, that principle. Its constitution is both code and covenant, both mechanism and mythos. It invites the citizen to think of politics not as a competition for control but as a continuous act of creation. To grasp the full significance of this movement, one must see it not as secession but as evolution. Cascadia does not merely withdraw from existing states, it transcends their conceptual limits. It proposes a polity compatible with the information age, decentralized, transparent, resilient, and rooted in the moral ecology of the individual. Where the industrial nation-state was built on scarcity and command, Cascadia envisions abundance and cooperation. Its ultimate aspiration is post-scarcity civilization, a society where the material basis of life is secured and human energy can be devoted to art, inquiry, and fellowship. The pursuit of this goal through open technology, renewable energy, and educational freedom reflects a belief that political emancipation must be accompanied by material and cognitive emancipation. Freedom is not only a legal status but a condition of existence. Yet Cascadia is not naive about the obstacles ahead. The Declaration speaks candidly of the almost insurmountable task facing those who defy the empires of the world. It recognizes that tyranny adapts, that power will not yield without struggle. But it affirms, with prophetic resolve, that liberty is more important than even life itself. This is the moral absolute at the heart of the movement, the conviction that human dignity resides in the refusal to submit to injustice, whatever the cost. Such language may strike modern ears as archaic, yet in an age of surveillance, coercion, and ideological manipulation, it resounds with renewed relevance. The courage to say no, to reclaim the right of refusal, is the foundation of all other freedoms. In the final analysis, the ethos of Cascadia is the re-enchantment of the political through the moral imagination. It seeks to restore the sense that law can be luminous, that governance can reflect the beauty of truth. Its constitutional prose, at once technical and poetic, embodies this aspiration. It reads not merely as legislation but as liturgy, a ritual affirmation that humanity is capable of self-rule when guided by conscience and reason. In its invocation of respect in truth, rights, and justice, one hears the echo of every age that has struggled to reconcile power with virtue. Cascadia's innovation lies in its synthesis of those ideals with the tools of modernity, crafting a framework where technology serves transparency and freedom rather than domination. Thus the Zeitgeist of Cascadia is neither escapist nor utopian. It is the sober faith that the architecture of liberty can be rebuilt from first principles, that civilization can evolve beyond coercion. It recognizes that the political forms of the industrial era, centralized states, partisan hierarchies, opaque bureaucracies, are no longer adequate to the complexity of an interconnected world. In their place it proposes a federated network of sovereign persons and communities, bound by voluntary association and mutual respect. It is, in essence, the translation of natural law into the digital vernacular of the age, a new social physics grounded in transparency, reciprocity, and reason. The Cascadian experiment, if it endures, will test whether humanity can at last mature into the freedom it has always proclaimed. Its constitution is both a map and a map toward a society governed by conscience, and a mirror reflecting the eternal struggle between the love of power and the power of love. Whether it becomes a living polity or remains a beacon in theory, it has already expanded the horizon of political imagination. It reminds us that the sovereignty of the person is not an invention of any age but the timeless condition of being human. And in affirming that truth, Cascadia stands as a testament to the indestructible will of free beings to shape their destiny in accordance with justice, compassion, and truth.